The galaxy had never seen a species quite like humans. When their first ships appeared at the edge of conquered space 50 years ago, the elder races had watched with mild curiosity. The vessels were small and simple. They moved slowly through the darkness between stars. Their weapons were basic. Their shields were weak. By all measurements that mattered, humanity was unremarkable. Ambassador remembered those early days well. She had been a young diplomat then, fresh from Earth's academies, full of hope about humanity's place among the stars. Now, at 73 years old, she stood in the great hall of the Galactic Concord and wondered if that hope had been foolish. The Concord was a coalition of 300 spacefaring species. Some had traveled the stars for 1,000,000 years. Others had built empires that spanned entire galaxies. They had technologies that humans could barely understand. They had powers that seemed like magic. Next to them, humanity was like a child learning to walk in a room full of giants. But smiled anyway. She always smiled. "The human delegation requests an increase in mining rights," she said to the assembly. Her voice was calm and pleasant. "Our current allocation is insufficient for our growing population." Laughter rippled through the chamber. The delegate, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms, leaned forward in his seat. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "if humanity developed better technology, they would not need so many resources. You waste everything you touch." More laughter, felt the insult like a knife in her chest, but she kept smiling. "We appreciate the feedback," she said. "We will work to improve our efficiency." She bowed slightly and returned to her seat. Her assistant, a young man named David, looked at her with barely controlled anger. "How can you accept this?" he whispered. "They mock us every single day. They give us the worst deals. They treat us like animals." Placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Patience," she said softly. "Change takes time." This was the reality of human existence in the galaxy. Earth had joined the Concord, hopping for partnership and friendship. Instead, they had received mockery and abuse. The elder races saw humans as primitive creatures from a dangerous planet. Earth was a death world, they said. Too hot, too cold, too much gravity, too many predators. The fact that humans had survived such a place was seen not as a sign of strength, but as evidence that they were little better than animals themselves. Humanity had been given the worst territories. Their colonies existed on the edges of known space, in systems that no other species wanted. They mined asteroids that contained low-quality ore. They farmed planets with poor soil. Every trade deal was designed to benefit others at humanity's expense. And through it all, humans remained polite. When a freighter crashed on a human colony world, humans rushed to help. They pulled survivors from the wreckage. They treated the wounded. They rebuilt the ship at their own expense. The government sent no thanks. Instead, they complained that the repairs were not of high enough quality. Humans apologized and offered to do better next time. When a plague swept through space, human medical teams volunteered to help. They worked for months in dangerous conditions. They saved millions of lives. The government rewarded them by reducing their trade quotas. Humans accepted the decision with grace. When human diplomats were insulted, they smiled. When human ships were pushed aside, they moved. When human citizens were mistreated on alien worlds, they filed polite complaints that were always ignored. The galaxy decided that humans were weak. They were too soft, too kind, too willing to bend. They were the perfect species to exploit, and the Conquered exploited them eagerly. But far from conquered space, another power was watching. The Dominion had no interest in the Conquered's games of politics and trade. They were warriors, conquerors. Their empire had grown through blood and fire, consuming 40 worlds in their expansion across the stars. Their ships were weapons of terror. Their soldiers were bred for violence. They respected only strength, and they had seen none in humanity. High Commander studied the reports from his intelligence officers with growing interest. The humans had ships, yes, but they were primitive. The humans had colonies, yes, but they were poorly defended. The humans had resources, yes, but they seemed incapable of using them effectively. Most importantly, the humans were far from the Conquered's protection. Their colonies existed on the border between conquered space and the empty regions where the hunted. "They are prey," said to his war council. His voice was deep and cold like stones grinding together. "Weak prey that the conquered does not value. If we take them, no one will stop us." His officers agreed. The decision was made. 3 human colony ships vanished near the border 2 months later. They were simple vessels, carrying families to new homes on distant worlds. 4,000 people disappeared without a trace. Ambassador filed a formal complaint with the Conquered. She requested an investigation. She asked for protection for human shipping lanes. The Conquered did nothing. Was not surprised. She had long ago learned that the galaxy did not care about human lives, but she had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that basic decency might prevail. Then they sent their message. It was broadcast across all frequencies, impossible to ignore. The colonists had been captured. They were shown kneeling in rows, their hands bound, their faces filled with terror. Soldiers walked among them with weapons drawn. "Humanity," the announcer declared, "your people now belong to the Dominion. This is the fate of the weak. This is the price of softness. Watch now as we demonstrate what happens to prey." The executions were broadcast live. 4,000 men, women, and children, killed one by one while the galaxy watched. Stood in her office on the Conquered station and watched every second. Her hands shook. Her eyes burned with tears, but she did not look away. She owed them that much. When it was over, she composed herself. She straightened her uniform. She walked to the communication center and prepared Earth's official response. The message was broadcast 12 hours later. His face appeared on screens across the galaxy, calm and composed as always. "The people of Earth are deeply saddened by this tragedy," she said. "We urge the Dominion to reconsider their aggressive posture. Humanity desires peace. We believe that conflict serves no one's interests. We remain open to dialogue and hope that reason will prevail." The galaxy laughed. The delegate called it pathetic. The ambassador said humans deserved their fate. A dozen other species mocked humanity's weakness, their inability to respond with strength. They were delighted. High Commander watched the human response and smiled with all 3 rows of his teeth. "They beg for peace after we slaughter their people," he said. "They are even weaker than we imagined. Prepare the invasion fleet. We will take everything they have." 12,000 warships began moving toward human space, the largest invasion force the Quadrant had ever seen. They expected no resistance. They expected surrender. They expected to add humanity's worlds to their empire within weeks. But in the quiet offices of Earth's government, far from alien eyes, different preparations were being made. Admiral Stone stood before a wall of screens showing the approaching fleet. His face was hard and unreadable. Around him, officers worked in tense silence. "They think we're prey," he said quietly. "Yes, sir," his aide replied. "Intelligence suggests they expect total victory within 30 days. Stone nodded slowly. He had waited a long time for this moment. 50 years of smiling, 50 years of bowing, 50 years of watching his people be mocked and abused while Earth built something in secret that the galaxy could not imagine. "Maintain courtesy protocols," he said finally, "for now." He turned away from the screens. "But start preparing the real fleet." The invasion began on a quiet Tuesday morning. Their fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of human space like a storm appearing from nowhere. 12,000 warships, each one bristling with weapons, each one carrying soldiers eager for conquest. They spread across the darkness in perfect formation, blocking out the stars themselves. High Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched his forces move into position. He had conquered 40 worlds in his career. He had burned cities and crushed armies. He had never known defeat, and he was certain he would not know it today. "Begin the assault on their outer colonies," he ordered. "Show no mercy. I want humanity to understand what happens to those who are weak." The first human world to fall was called Haven. It was a small colony, barely 50,000 people, mostly farmers and miners. Their defense force consisted of 12 old patrol ships and a few ground-based weapons. Against the Armada, they had no chance. But something strange happened when the battle began. The human ships did not flee. They did not surrender. They fought. Their weapons were weaker than the expected, their shields thinner, their tactics more basic, but they fought with a ferocity that surprised the invaders. More surprising still was how they fought. A cruiser moved to destroy a human patrol ship. The human vessel dodged at the last moment and fired a precise shot that disabled the cruiser's engines. The cruiser was left drifting, helpless but alive. The human ship moved on to the next target without finishing the kill. Across the battlefield, the same pattern repeated. Human weapons targeted engines, not reactors. They aimed for weapons systems, not life support. They disabled ships instead of destroying them. Crews found themselves captured rather than killed. Commander watched the reports with confusion. This was not how wars were fought. You crushed your enemies. You destroyed them completely. You left nothing behind that could threaten you later. "What are they doing?" he demanded. "Unknown, Commander," his tactical officer replied. "Their strategy makes no sense." Haven fell eventually. The human defense force was too small to hold against such overwhelming numbers. But instead of the quick slaughter expected, the battle took hours. And when it was over, more than 100 ships were disabled, their crews waiting for rescue. The human prisoners were taken aboard vessels, expected them to beg for their lives. Instead, they remained calm. Some even smiled. "You will tell us your military secrets," an interrogator growled at a captured human captain. The captain, a woman named Sarah, simply shrugged. "I'm happy to answer any questions. Would you like some water? You seem stressed." The interrogator did not know how to respond to this. News of the invasion spread quickly through the galaxy. The conquered assembly watched the reports with interest but no concern. To them, this was entertainment. The weak humans were finally getting what they deserved. Ambassador requested an emergency session of the assembly. She stood before the gathered delegates and spoke with quiet dignity. "The Dominion has invaded human space without provocation," she said. "They have attacked our colonies. They have killed our citizens. We request the Conquered's assistance in defending ourselves." The chamber was silent for a moment. Then the delegate spoke. "Why should we help you?" he asked. "You cannot even help yourselves. Your ships are primitive. Your soldiers are soft. Perhaps if you had developed proper military technology instead of wasting resources on medical missions and disaster relief, you would not be in this situation." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. "The Conquered does not involve itself in conflicts between minor powers," the ambassador added. "This is your problem to solve." Nodded slowly. She had expected this answer. She had always known it would come. "I understand," she said. "Thank you for your consideration." She gathered her delegation and left. The other delegates returned to their conversations, already forgetting about the humans and their troubles. Back on Earth, Admiral Stone received word of the Assembly's decision. "They refused us," David reported. "They won't help, they don't care." Stone nodded. He had expected nothing else. The galaxy had made its position clear long ago. Humans were on their own. "How is the evacuation proceeding?" he asked. "Outer colonies are emptying as fast as we can move ships. Most civilians will be in safe zones within 2 weeks." "And the advance?" "Slower than expected, sir. They're having trouble with our disabled ships. They keep stopping to rescue their crews." A small smile crossed Stone's face. Good, that was the plan. The war continued. More human worlds fell, more human ships were destroyed, but the pattern remained strange. Humans fought hard but never ruthlessly. They disabled rather than destroyed. They captured rather than killed. And they were extraordinarily kind to their prisoners. Soldiers captured in battle found themselves treated better than they had ever been treated in their own military. They were given food, medical care, and comfortable quarters. Human counselors spoke with them about their experiences. Some prisoners were confused, others were suspicious, but slowly many began to talk. They talked about military codes. They talked about ship weaknesses. They talked about the structure of their fleet. They talked about everything because the humans were so nice and the questions seemed so harmless. High Commander grew increasingly frustrated. The invasion should have been over in days. Instead, it was dragging on for weeks. His forces were winning, yes, but too slowly, and the humans kept sending those ridiculous peace messages. "We continue to hope for a diplomatic solution," Ambassador said in her latest broadcast. "The door to negotiation remains open." Crushed the screen beneath his fist. "They are mocking us," he snarled. "They lose battle after battle and still they speak of peace. I will teach them the cost of such weakness." He ordered his fleet to converge on humanity's largest colony world, New Geneva, 800 million people, the crown jewel of human civilization outside Earth itself. "We will burn it," declared. "We will reduce it to ash and send the recordings to every human world. Then they will understand that peace is not an option, only submission." The conquered received news of his intentions. Some delegates expressed mild concern. Burning an entire world was extreme, even by galactic standards. But no one moved to stop it. On Earth, Admiral Stone received the intelligence about New Geneva. He had known this moment would come eventually. He had prepared for it his entire career. He opened a secure channel to Ambassador. He said quietly, "I think it's time." There was a long pause. When spoke, her voice was heavy with sadness. "Are you certain? Once we do this, there is no going back. They're going to burn New Geneva, 800 million people. If we don't act now, they will all die." Closed her eyes. For 50 years, she had believed in patience. She had believed that humanity could earn its place through kindness and service. She had smiled through every insult, absorbed every abuse, hoping that eventually the galaxy would see humans as worthy of respect. That hope was dying now. Perhaps it had been dead for a long time. "Very well," she said finally. "I'm authorizing the suspension of courtesy protocols at your discretion." Stone nodded. "I'll give them one more chance, one final warning if they don't listen." He paused. "If they don't listen, we stop pretending." That night, a single encrypted message was transmitted to every human ship, every colony, every military installation across human space. Courtesy protocols may be suspended at leadership discretion. Prepare for Condition Alpha. Across the galaxy, human officers who had spent their careers pretending to be weaker than they were began unlocking sealed compartments. Hidden weapons systems came online. Secret shipyards powered up. The real human fleet, hidden for 50 years in asteroid fields and gas giants and empty space, began to move. They had no idea what was coming. Neither did anyone else. The fleet surrounded New Geneva like a fist closing around a throat. 3,000 warships formed a sphere around the planet, blocking any escape. High Commander stood on his bridge and looked down at the world beneath him. 800 million humans lived on that surface. Farmers, teachers, doctors, children, all of them would burn today. "Open a broadcast channel," commanded. "I want every human to hear this." His image appeared on every screen across the planet. Parents gathered their children close. Soldiers stood at their posts. People prayed in languages from a dozen Earth cultures. "Humans of New Geneva," said, his voice cold and sharp, "your time has ended. Your species has proven itself too weak to exist in this galaxy. Your leaders beg for peace while we slaughter them like animals. Your soldiers fight with strategies that make no sense. You are a failure of evolution." He paused, letting the words sink in. "In 1 hour I will begin the bombardment of your world. Every city will burn. Every forest will become ash. When I am finished, nothing will remain but a dead rock floating in space. This is the price of weakness. This is what happens to prey." He smiled, showing all 3 rows of teeth. "Unless your leaders surrender unconditionally within that hour, all humans everywhere must submit to rule. Your species will serve us as slaves forever. This is your only option. Choose now." The broadcast ended. Leaned back in his command chair, satisfied. The humans would surrender. They always took the peaceful option. They were too soft to do anything else. 30 minutes passed. The human response arrived. But it did not come from Ambassador. It came from a man had never seen before. A human with gray hair and cold eyes who wore a military uniform decorated with more medals than could count. "This is Fleet Admiral Stone of the United Earth Defense Directorate," the man said. His voice was calm, but there was something in it that made scales prickle with an unfamiliar sensation. "For 50 years humanity has chosen courtesy. We absorbed your insults. We accepted unfair treaties. We smiled while you mocked us. We treated your prisoners with kindness while you executed ours. We did this not from weakness but from hope. Hope that civilization could exist without barbarism. Hope that other species might someday see us as equals rather than prey." Stone's eyes seemed to look directly through the screen. "That hope is now exhausted." Something in the Admiral's tone changed. It grew harder, colder. "You have 48 hours to withdraw completely from human space. Every ship, every soldier, every trace of presence must be gone. This is Earth's last warning." Stone leaned forward slightly. "Stop attacking, or we stop pretending to be courteous." The transmission ended. Stared at the empty screen for a long moment. Then he began to laugh. His officers joined him, the sound filling the bridge. "They threaten us," said through his laughter. "With what? Their primitive ships, their weak weapons. They have nothing that can stop us." He waved a dismissive hand. "Ignore them, begin the bombardment." His tactical officer nodded and turned to give the order. The order was never completed. In the space of 6 minutes, the fleet ceased to exist as a fighting force. It began with the ships they had disabled in earlier battles. Hundreds of vessels had been left drifting in space, their crews rescued, their systems apparently dead. But those systems had not been dead. They had been waiting. Human engineering teams had spent weeks aboard those ships. They had learned every system, every code, every weakness. Now, at a single signal, those ships came back to life. Their weapons powered up. Their engines ignited. But now they were crewed by humans who understood them perfectly. 300 ships opened fire on their own fleet from within. At the same time, space itself seemed to tear apart around the invasion force. Ships appeared from nowhere. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Human vessels that had been hidden in asteroid fields for decades. Ships that had been built in secret shipyards deep inside gas giants. A fleet that the galaxy had never known existed. And these ships were not primitive. Watched in disbelief as human weapons tore through shields like they were made of paper. Their ships moved with speed and precision that should have been impossible. Their tactics were perfect, coordinated, devastating. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our intelligence said they were weak. They have been weak for 50 years. An explosion rocked the flagship. Alarms screamed. Officers ran in panic. "Commander," his tactical officer shouted, "we have lost half the fleet. Our ships are being targeted with perfect accuracy. They know our codes, they know our weaknesses, they know everything. The prisoners realized with horror. All those kind conversations, all those harmless questions. The humans had been learning. They had been preparing. Every moment of their apparent weakness had been a performance, and he had been too arrogant to see it. Another explosion. The bridge tilted, grabbed his command chair to stay upright. "Fall back," he ordered. "All ships retreat." But retreat was impossible. Human vessels blocked every escape route, and they were not disabling ships anymore. They were destroying them. Cruisers vanished in balls of fire. Battleships cracked apart under concentrated fire. The fleet that had seemed invincible moments ago was being torn to pieces. On the surface of New Geneva, the people watched the sky light up with explosions. They had been preparing to die. Instead, they watched their enemies burn. Flagship lost power. Emergency lights flickered red as human boarding parties cut through the hull. His guards fought back, but they were no match for human Marines. These soldiers moved like nothing had ever seen. They were precise, professional, and absolutely ruthless. The bridge doors exploded inward. Drew his weapon, ready to die fighting. A human Marine stepped through the smoke. She was smaller than most, but she moved with complete confidence. Her weapon was pointed at his chest. "High Commander," she said calmly, "you are under arrest for war crimes against humanity. These include the execution of 4,000 civilians, the illegal invasion of sovereign territory, and the threatened genocide of New Geneva." His hand trembled on his weapon. He could fire. He could die with honor. The Marine seemed to read his thoughts. "I wouldn't," she said. "If you die here, you become a martyr. Your people will continue the war for generations. But if you stand trial, if your crimes are exposed to the entire galaxy, your empire will collapse from within. Your soldiers will see what you really are." She lowered her weapon slightly. "Your choice, Commander. Die a hero or live long enough for everyone to learn the truth about you." His hand shook. Slowly, he let the weapon fall. The Marine nodded. She reached into her pack and pulled something out, a small package wrapped in silver. "Protein bar," she said, tossing it to him. "You should eat something. The tribunal's going to take a while." Across the battlefield, the destruction ended. It had taken 6 minutes. 6 minutes to destroy an invasion force that had conquered 40 worlds. 6 minutes to transform humanity from prey to predator. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. Admiral Stone's fleet surrounded the remaining ships. Survivors were being rescued. Prisoners were being processed. The efficiency was terrifying. Stone opened a channel to the Galactic Concord. "This is Admiral Stone," he said. His voice was the same calm tone as before. "The invasion has been stopped. High Commander is in custody. His fleet is destroyed." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Humanity wishes to inform the conquered that we remain committed to peace. We have no interest in conquest or revenge. But understand this clearly, we were never weak. We were patient. Those are very different things." His eyes hardened. "The courtesy we have shown for 50 years was a choice. We can make different choices. We hope we never have to." The transmission ended. In the great hall of the Concord Assembly, 300 species sat in absolute silence. The humans they had mocked, insulted, and exploited for half a century had just revealed themselves to be something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something that had been watching them the whole time. The aftermath of the Battle of New Geneva sent shockwaves through every corner of the galaxy. Intelligence agencies from 100 different species scrambled to understand what had happened. Their analysts worked without sleep, studying every piece of data they could find. What they discovered terrified them more than the battle itself. Humanity had been pretending. For 50 years, everything they had shown the galaxy was a lie. The primitive ships that humans flew in public were decoys. Real human vessels were hidden across the galaxy in places no one had thought to look. Asteroid fields contained secret shipyards. Gas giants housed manufacturing facilities. Empty systems that other species had ignored were actually military strongholds. Human technology was not backward. It was advanced beyond anything the conquered had imagined. Their weapons could crack planets. Their shields could withstand attacks from entire fleets. They had developed something called the quiet option that no intelligence agency could identify, and every attempt to learn more resulted in dead ends and missing data. Most disturbing of all was the scope of human intelligence gathering. For 50 years, humans had smiled and bowed and accepted insults, but they had also been watching. Every species that mocked them had been studied. Every government that cheated them had been analyzed. Every military that threatened them had been penetrated. Humans knew the banking codes. They knew the military frequencies. They knew the secret locations of a dozen species' hidden bases. They knew everything because no one had thought to hide anything from such a weak, pathetic species. The delegate who had laughed at humanity's extinction requested asylum on Earth 3 days after the battle. His request was granted immediately, politely, without any mention of his previous insults. This terrified the galaxy more than any weapon could. Ambassador returned to the conquered assembly 1 week after New Geneva. The chamber that had once buzzed with conversation fell completely silent when she entered. 300 species watched her walk to the central platform with new eyes. She looked the same as always, gray hair pulled back neatly, simple uniform without decoration, that same calm smile she had worn through every insult and mockery. But now they saw the smile differently. "Fellow members of the Galactic Conquered," she began, her voice as pleasant as ever. "Humanity comes before you today not as conquerors but as partners. We have no desire for revenge. We have no interest in empire. What happened to the Dominion was not a statement of human ambition. It was a response to an existential threat to our people." She paused, looking around the chamber. "For 50 years, we chose to present ourselves as a peaceful, cooperative species. We hoped that through service and kindness, we might earn the respect of the galactic community. Instead, we earned mockery. We accepted unfair treaties because we believed that eventually fairness would prevail. We absorbed insults because we believed that eventually we would be seen as equals." Her smile remained, but her eyes grew harder. "We understand now that this approach was unsuccessful, so we will be more direct." She gestured, and a holographic display appeared above the platform. It showed detailed information about every species in the chamber: military capabilities, economic weaknesses, political divisions, secrets that should have been impossible for humanity to know. "This is what we know about you," said simply. "All of you, everything you have hidden, everything you thought was safe." The chamber erupted in panic. Delegates shouted and pointed. Some tried to leave. Security forces moved but had nowhere to go. Raised her hand and the chaos stopped. "We are not going to use this information," she continued calmly. "We never wanted to. We gathered it because we had to. Because we knew that someday someone would decide that humanity was prey. We needed to be able to defend ourselves when that day came." She deactivated the display. "What we want is simple. We want the same thing we have always wanted: fair treatment, equal partnerships, respect, nothing more and nothing less." She looked directly at the representative, who had replaced the one who fled to Earth. "We propose that all existing treaties between humanity and the conquered be renegotiated. This time, the terms will be fair. This time, humans will be treated as equals. In exchange, humanity will continue to be what we have always been: a peaceful species that prefers cooperation to conflict." She smiled again. "But understand this clearly. Our patience was a gift. Our kindness was a choice. We can make other choices if necessary. We very much hope that will never be required." She bowed politely and waited. The vote was unanimous. Every treaty would be renegotiated. Every past wrong would be addressed. Humanity would be treated as an equal member of the galactic community. No one had ever seen the conquered agree on anything so quickly. In the months that followed, the galaxy transformed around humanity. Trade deals that had stripped human colonies of resources were rewritten. Human merchants received fair prices for their goods. Human ships were no longer pushed aside in shipping lanes. Human citizens were treated with respect on alien worlds. Former enemies became eager allies. Those who had mocked humanity for decades suddenly remembered that humans had saved millions of their people during the plague. They sent diplomatic missions and trade delegations. They offered technology exchanges and cultural partnerships. Other species followed. Everyone wanted to be friends with the humans now. Everyone wanted to make sure that humanity remembered them as allies rather than enemies. Some species were more calculating. They studied human tactics and tried to understand how such deception had been possible. How had humanity hidden so much for so long? How had they remained patient through so many insults? The answer, analysts eventually concluded, was terrifying in its simplicity. Humans were predators. Not the obvious kind, like the with their fangs and their aggression. Humans were the other kind, the kind that smiled and helped and waited, the kind that studied their prey until they understood every weakness, the kind that did not attack until they were absolutely certain of victory. Earth had evolved creatures like this, hunters that built traps and waited for prey to walk into them, pack hunters that coordinated across vast distances, ambush predators that lay still for hours before striking with perfect precision. Humanity was not weak. Humanity had simply been hunting on a longer timeline than anyone had imagined. Admiral Stone retired 3 months after the battle. He gave no interviews and made no public statements. He simply disappeared to a small house on a quiet colony world, where he spent his days gardening and reading. When journalists found him and asked about his role in human history, he simply shrugged. "I did what needed to be done," he said. "I wish it had never been necessary. We gave them every chance to treat us fairly. They chose not to. Eventually, we ran out of patience." He looked up at the stars. "We're not monsters," he added quietly. "We never wanted to hurt anyone, but we're not victims either. We learned a long time ago that kindness without strength gets you killed, so we developed strength. We just hoped we would never have to use it." He smiled, and for a moment he looked just like Ambassador. "Fortunately," he said, "we only had to use it once. Now everyone understands, and understanding is really all we ever wanted." Across the galaxy, humanity continued as it always had. Medical teams deployed to disaster zones. Engineers helped with construction projects. Scientists shared their research freely. Teachers offered their knowledge to anyone who wanted to learn. Humans were still kind. They were still helpful. They were still the species that had smiled through 50 years of abuse and never struck back in anger. But now when humans smiled, the galaxy smiled back. Because now everyone knew what was behind that smile. And no one wanted to find out what would happen if humanity stopped being polite. 10 years passed like water flowing over stone. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The old order, built on power and fear and the exploitation of weaker species, had crumbled. In its place, something new was growing, something that looked surprisingly like what humanity had always wanted. The Dominion was gone, not destroyed but transformed. War crimes tribunals had processed thousands of cases. Criminals had been punished. Victims had been compensated. The empire that had conquered 40 worlds through violence had been dismantled piece by piece. But humanity had not crushed they had rebuilt them. Human teachers worked in schools, introducing concepts like cooperation and diplomacy that the warrior species had never understood. Human counselors helped soldiers deal with trauma from decades of violence. Human engineers rebuilt the infrastructure that war had destroyed. It was strange at first. Many resisted. They had been raised to believe that strength meant domination, that weakness meant death. The idea that a species could be strong and kind at the same time made no sense to them. But slowly things changed. Young grew up seeing humans as helpers rather than enemies. They learned that strength could be used to build rather than destroy. They discovered that their greatest warriors were not those who killed the most enemies, but those who protected the most innocents. Watched these changes from his prison cell with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been hope. He had expected execution. Instead, he had received a fair trial. His crimes had been exposed to the entire galaxy. His own people had turned against him when they learned what he had truly done. But the humans had not killed him. They had simply locked him away and let time do its work. A human counselor visited him once a week. She was kind and patient like all humans seemed to be. She never judged him. She simply talked and listened and slowly helped him understand what he had become and why. "I do not understand you," said to her one day. "I murdered your people. I planned to burn your worlds. You should want me dead." The counselor smiled. "Killing you would not bring back the people you murdered," she said. "It would not undo the harm you caused. It would only create more violence, more anger, more pain. We have had enough of that." She leaned forward. "We want you to understand what you did. We want you to feel the weight of it, not as punishment but as education. Because someday, when you truly understand, you might be able to help others avoid the path you walked." Was silent for a long time. "You are strange creatures," he said finally. The counselor's smile widened. "We get that a lot." Ambassador had become Secretary General of a reformed Galactic Concord. It was a position that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. A human leading the galaxy's governing body. But the old rules no longer applied. She stood before the assembly on the 10th anniversary of the warning, looking out at hundreds of species who now saw humanity very differently than they once had. 10 years ago, she began, humanity gave the galaxy a warning. We asked to be treated fairly. We asked for the violence to stop. We said that if it did not, we would stop pretending to be courteous." She paused, letting the memory settle over the chamber. "Many of you expected us to become conquerors after that. You expected us to take revenge for decades of mistreatment. You expected us to use our power to dominate others the way you had dominated us." She shook her head slowly. "That was never who we are." The display behind her showed images from the past decade. Human doctors treating alien patients. Human engineers building infrastructure on distant worlds. Human teachers sharing knowledge freely. Human diplomats mediating conflicts between species that had fought for centuries. "We never wanted power over others," continued. "We wanted partnership with others. We wanted to be part of a galaxy where species cooperated instead of competed, where the strong helped the weak instead of exploiting them, where kindness was seen as strength rather than weakness." She smiled, and it was the same warm smile she had worn through 50 years of insults. "We spent 5 decades trying to build that galaxy through patience and service. It did not work, so we showed you another side of humanity. We showed you that we were not weak. We showed you that our kindness was a choice, not a necessity." Her eyes swept across the chamber. "But understand this. The kindness was always the real us. The weapons, the fleets, the hidden strength, those were tools we hoped never to use. We built them because the galaxy forced us to. We used them because we had no other choice." She stepped back from the podium. "There is an old human saying, 'Speak softly and carry a big stick.' For 50 years we spoke softly. We hoped you would listen. Now you have seen the stick. We hope we never have to use it again." The chamber was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of understanding. "Now," said, her voice brightening, "shall we discuss the new colony support initiative? I believe they had some excellent proposals for medical training programs." The session continued. Species that had once mocked humanity now worked alongside them as equals. Old enemies collaborated on projects that benefited everyone. The galaxy was learning, slowly, how to be better. It was not perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still conflicts, still disagreements, still species that resented human influence. But the foundation had been laid for something different. Something that might, given time, grow into the kind of galaxy that humanity had always dreamed of. On a small colony world at the edge of human space, a retired admiral worked in his garden. Stone was older now, his hair completely white, his hands spotted with age, but he still stood straight and his eyes were still sharp. A young visited him sometimes. She was the daughter of one of the soldiers who had invaded human space a decade ago. Her father had died in the battle, but she bore no grudge. She had grown up in the new culture, the one that valued building over destroying. "Why did you do it?" she asked him one afternoon, sitting on his porch and watching the sunset. "You could have crushed us completely. You could have destroyed our worlds the way we planned to destroy yours. Why didn't you?" Stone was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. "Because that is not who we are," he said finally. "We fought because we had to. We showed our strength because we had to. But revenge would have made us into something we did not want to be. It would have proven that we were no better than those who attacked us." He turned to look at her. The point was never to hurt anyone. The point was to create a galaxy where no one had to be hurt, where species could trust each other, where kindness was not a weakness but a strength. He smiled, and it was the same smile that humans had worn for generations. "We are still working on that. We may always be working on that, but we are closer now than we have ever been." The young nodded slowly. She did not fully understand these strange, soft, terrifying creatures. Perhaps no one ever would. But she was beginning to learn. And across the galaxy, other species were learning too. Learning that the humans who smiled and helped and never seemed to fight back were not weak. They were patient. They were kind. And they were absolutely, terrifyingly committed to building a better universe, whether the rest of the galaxy wanted it or not. The warning had been given once. It had never needed to be given again. And in the quiet moments, when the stars shone bright above worlds that had once been enemies and were now becoming friends, humanity continued to do what it had always done. They smiled. They helped. They hoped. And this time, finally, the galaxy hoped with them.